Hello and welcome to the tutorial for laying out the UVs of your vehicle assignment for the pipelines class. Let's begin. So when we last left off, we had a partially modeled DeLorean, and I'm going to I actually used mirror geometry and flipped it over, and we don't really need this geometry. People sometimes mirror and then try to lay out the UVs. So let me show you how to fix that. First thing we want to do is clean up our scene. So I'm going to open up the outliner. All these meshes for the shoebox garage we no longer need, so I'm going to delete them. The next step, I'm going to come up here and optimize my scene size, specifically because what happens when you delete things such as your the geometry we just deleted, remember, has a shader assigned to each and every one of them. So what we want to do is make sure that those shaders are cleaned up as well. And you can see by me bringing in the hypershade that the shaders that were assigned to each of those different polygon sides still exist here in Maya. And that's because when I grabbed the geometry and just pressed the delete button, it got rid of the geometry. It did not actually delete all the shaders that were assigned to it. And each and every one has, of course, these little drawings assigned to it for the top and the right, etc. So when you bring up the optimized scene, it sort of gets rid of everything for you that is a straggler or an orphaned process, as it were. So when I say optimize, it will ask for validation. I say yes, and then it'll clean up those shaders. So not only have I gotten rid of the geometry, I've gotten rid of its corresponding shaders. Then I can come in here and, let's see, turn the grid back on because I'm going to be modeling this. And I want to grab just these faces that are on one side of the car. All of these. Is that the side with the tire or not? Let's just quickly check. Certainly is. Wrong side. Choose that side, press delete. Now we're back with pretty much what we need just to lay out UVs. We do not want to lay it out. We do not want to duplicate geometry before we've laid out all the UVs necessary for this vehicle. Another thing to do at this point, of course, is to delete your history. Under Edit, come here to delete all by type. This is a very sort of an extreme process of nuking all history on everything. Delete by type does that just for the history of the object that is selected. I want to do the deletion of history for everything in this scene. So I'm going to choose delete all by type history. You will then see this history get cleaned up here on the right. And there we are. So now we're ready to kind of jump in and start laying things out. The reason I'm going to leave these objects separate and not combine them yet is we have yet to sort out the UVs, because when we bring up the UV editor under Window, you can see that these separate objects currently are kind of occupying the whole of the UV space. The car is occupying this bit down here, and the tire is kind of laid over, and when you select them both, they're a bit of a mess. And so we want to just take things one at a time as far as laying out the UVs, and then we want to combine them. And it's going to be done much easier if we keep these objects separate for now, because it's going to allow us to lay out the UVs, which, by the way, we can have several objects selected, and we're still allowed to manipulate UVs, even with more than one object selected. So let's go in quickly and take a look at what we need to sort out for these, for this particular model. The side of the car that we've modeled, because we used an extrusion, the front of it, the hood, the front windshield, the top, it's all there, but it's been extruded, so it's hiding here as a perfectly two-dimensional object. So if I were to select this face, you can see that that face is actually just seen sort of projected from the side, and that's not going to work for us. So this initial side of the car, I'm going to select all the faces that constitute the exact side of the car, that which is seen exactly from the side view. Please ignore the fact this is front. I apparently built this at a 90-degree angle. So when I refer to side, I don't mean the camera, I mean actually the view of the vehicle. So I'm going to select all of the polygons that constitute kind of the side of the car. And you can see from the top view that includes the slanted windows. The reason I'm doing this is because I want to project the UVs in that direction. I want to go up here to UV, pop down to planar, and go into the options for it, because I want to, even though it looks like it's already kind of worked out nicely, I want to show you the process to allow you to, in the future, manufacture UVs that are going to be proportional to the model. And that's very important, because when we project things, I do believe that in the default settings, I'm going to reset my settings here, this is turned off. Keep image width and height ratio is off. So if I were to project this now, it would kind of fill the whole of this UV layout. Plus it's apparently projected from the wrong angle, you can tell. So it's really kind of a double mess here. Because the x-axis is not what I want in this particular case, I'm going to go and click on Z, because the y-axis is always going to be from above. It is the z-axis I need. This sort of square gives me a validation that I am projecting from the correct angle. However, as you can see here from the UV editor, it's projecting it and it's squashing it and stretching it to fill the whole of this space, which is what we don't want. We want to make sure that we've got keep image width and height ratio on, and now project it one more time. And everything is perfectly proportional, meaning that just as we took care to make sure that the modeling template we used in the Shoebox Garage setup was proportional to the image of the blueprint that we downloaded, everything had the proper dimensions and the proper proportions, so do we want to grab a picture of the car from the side, keeping the ratio consistent as well. The reason for this is we're going to be hunting down pictures of the DeLorean from the side on the internet, and we just need to grab a picture that's proportional, and it should fit exactly these dimensions, and that'll save us a lot of time and work. Plus, you don't want to get into the habit of squashing and stretching your images to accommodate squashed and stretched UVs. It's just a nightmare. Inconsistencies creep in and suddenly things don't look right and you're not able to figure out why. So in this case, we were able to project from the side, and what I like to do at this point is kind of grab all the UVs of this newly projected part of the car and move it off what I call the surgery table. So we're sure that that's all proportional. Great. Well, what do we have left? We have all of these UVs. Well, what are they? They look like a silhouette, but they are, in fact, as mentioned earlier, they are polygon planes, but they're projected from the sides. They look like silhouettes. They've been projected from this angle. So really those polygons will be flattened. And it makes sense now that we understand what it is. So what I want to do now is take the biggest, most recognizable parts of this car and project them according to the angle that they make the most sense to be projected in. Meaning, we grabbed these faces and we projected from the Z. You may be projecting from the X, depending upon the angle that you built the car. Because a majority of that imagery is more visible from this angle. Now, a majority of this geometry is going to be visible from the Y angle, meaning kind of the God's eye view from up here in the sky. And that makes sense for us to grab all these pieces that are effectively pointing right up at us and project those from the y-axis. And so now, because we've kept the proportions, this particular projection of everything is going to be exactly what we need for the top of the car, the hood, and kind of the even the front windshield. All that stuff is exactly what we want, and it's in the exact proportions that we want them. So what we're doing now is we're doing a process of reduction. You can see that we have fewer and fewer polygons left. We just sort of do this grand selection here in the UV editor to see what polygons are left. And in this case, we've got a couple of things such as the front and the back. These I like to do them because this is best seen exactly from the front, which for me would be the X. It may be Z for you, and it's really not attached to anything. I could grab the hood, but that 90-degree angle, this really makes a lot more sense as one whole unit to be projected all at once, because then we have fewer separate parts to deal with. But in this case, although I don't want a lot of separate UV sets running around, it makes more sense to project this exactly from the Z-axis, because I need that to be proportional as well. So I now have a projection, and that is not what I wanted. I wanted to project it from the other angle, so we'll go back into planar, and the X-axis, there we are. And all I'm doing every time we project, notice it's not proportional with each piece. It's proportional only to itself. Similar to when we first read in all the separate polygons or built them for the garage, the shoebox garage, each of the separate pieces were proportional in their imagery, but we had to make them all work together and be consistent in the end. So the one rule that's slightly different, of course, is the fact that these UV sets do not need to actually have an absolute value in relation to each other. These UV sets will be sized according to the needs of the modeler. And that sounds a bit strange, but we are going to give the most amount of, oh, this is interesting, look at this. We actually forgot to do the modeling here at the bottom because it's an oft ignored part. And I still need to justify these, this 5, looks like a 7-sided polygon. To continue my earlier point, these UV sets do not have to be in absolute scale with each other, because they need to be scaled according to their importance. So that means that areas that really garner the most visual recognition, such as the side of the car and the windshield and the top, these are the parts that are seen the most easily, especially from a distance. And so those will be given the most amount of size possible, the most amount of real estate on this UV layout, because they're the things that the user's eye will be attracted to. And they need the most amount of space possible so that we can put as much of the texture on there as possible to give it a recognizability from a distance. Other sections, such as this under area of the car, unless your game is specifically about cars being flipped around, you may never see this underside. So it's arguable you could actually project all these, squeeze all of the UVs on top of each other, and just put like a dark black texture on it. And it's using the least amount of real estate possible because of its relative importance or lack of importance to the user's eye. But let's return now to sorting out the bottoms here and making sure that even the bottom of the car is constructed from quads. So I'm going to just kind of cut across 1 and then 2 and then 3 cuts. Seems to want to make that triangle, which is acceptable. I don't really care because it still works, so we're fine. Okay, so that's been cut into quads as well. Again, you should be able to fix any modeling or texturing issues as you go along, and you will find them sometimes at the most interesting points in your production of a project. So let's return to the bottom of the car, which is this last little silhouette. As mentioned earlier, I really like to give areas that will never be seen, such as this firewall of the car. And yes, it is a firewall. I looked it up. It is basically the metal chassis of the car that prevents fires from getting into the interior of the car from the outside. So all of these are pretty unimportant. They really all could be living in the same space. So what you can do is you have your You can do whatever kind of projections you would prefer. If you try automatic, it will sort them out all separately, much like you did probably with the Phantasm ball, makes them all sort of proportional. You can then grab each shell and then just move it one on top of the other until they're literally occupying the same space. The problem is you need to sort of sever these borders, so that can be a pain if you really don't want to spend a lot of time. You also can come in and just grab all these and project from the top. Do what you will. I don't think it's a lot of effort to come in here and just grab all these edges and come down to polygons and say cut UV edges. These should now all be separate and allow you a much easier time kind of dragging them over to be on top of each other. So I'm going to quickly do that because it really is not going to spend a lot of time. And then once I get them all roughly in the same area, I can scale them all down to be a very tiny section of the UV map that just occupies a solid black color. So this is one of the least visually important parts of this particular vehicle because no one's going to be able to see past the tires that we're going to be doing. So now that they're all kind of on top of each other, I can quickly grab these, snap them all just for cleanliness sake, to all going to the left, then all snapping to the rightmost set of UVs. I grab this top section, I snap them upper or lower. Again, this particular shape is kind of arbitrary. And then I just grab by hand the top UVs and I drag them down so I can start squeezing this down to be one of the tinier shapes on the UV map. Well, that's pretty tiny. Could I have gotten there by grabbing the UVs and scaling? Absolutely. So I'm going to move this over here in the corner. And now I want to grab you may have noticed that I intentionally left this section untouched. Well, because it should be pretty easy for us to put a vague sort of mechanical texture over it. Because if the game is about throwing cars at each other, or giant monsters, superheroes, explosions, whatever, you may in fact see the bottom of this car. So I'm going to grab all the parts that may be visible by the car, come up here, go to UV, go again to planar, and make sure that I've got a y-axis projection from the top and or bottom, and they come in proportional as well. So with those selected, I move them on down. You could have said, look, I want to make sure that that part's part of the mechanical and that part's part of the mechanical. That's fine as well. I choose to just project those, let's say apply, and I've got them both at the same time, and I'm just going to grab each one of those sections and move them over onto this existing tiny black square that I had from earlier. So feel free to noodle around with this. You don't need to, this is a process that doesn't necessarily have only one way of doing it. And you can also tell that I'm able to quickly, using these flattening tools, kind of pop all the UVs over to the rightmost and the leftmost sections, being careful to grab them all and make sure that they're all kind of, that the sides that I want are all secured along with an anchor point, that I have the leftmost and or rightmost, uppermost or bottommost set of UVs selected simultaneous with the others, so it will move them all to the left and the right exactly as I want. So here's this section, and you can validate if you've got them all in the right place by going into face selection and selecting in one powerful stroke of your pen that you have in fact selected all of the parts of this vehicle that will be painted black or dark or whatever. And you can also grab a face and get to use the F key to your advantage, so you can grab all the faces here. And the texture for this will also be pretty tiny. It will be vague machinery. It really does not need to be that important. So now we've got something that is kind of all together, and this is where I'm going to start shrinking things down to what I think needs to be kind of the proper size. And I'm going to give these all an initial scaling because there's no way I need that amount of detail on the front hood of the front grille of the car, as well as the back. The things that are the most important are the side and the top. Those really are visual markers of what a car is recognized as. So let me kind of come in here, and since we're doing a lot more work inside of this UV editor, I'm going to click on this button which darkens the image and lets me see this UV layout a little better. I'm going to put that in there just right at the edges and give it one tiny incremental universal scaling down, so I've got some wiggle room here on the right and left. And if your UVs actually exceed the edge here, there's a chance that they will get a black pixel or like a null pixel, and remember that will stretch. That may work contrary to what you want and be this little pop of black or white or strange color that draws the eye to it. So always give yourself the tiniest bit of room so that your UVs, however tightly you've packed them, actually you have a little room for painting in and around. So I'm moving this kind of to the bottom here. Again, I get the slightest amount of pixels of room because that's going to be a very important part of the car. The next one, the second most important part of the car, is this kind of hood windshield section, and I'm going to drag that down. Seems to fit close enough with just enough of a gap over here. Again, your car, the car that you choose to do, and you should not be doing this car, and certainly not with this same layout, because this is about, and I didn't mention this in the previous video, but you should not be doing this assignment verbatim. Don't hand in the DeLorean done exactly as I'm showing here, because this is a tutorial regarding the concept of how to do it to the one you chose. So the next part is going to be the back, okay? And I'm going to move that down here. And the next part is going to be the front grille. I'm going to move it on top. I'm kind of eking out a little space here for the upper rightmost part of the car. Your particular setup for your vehicle may be different. It should be different. Not all cars are the same. And if you've chosen a huge truck, if you've chosen a rounder vehicle, all that's just fine. But use the logic of what's important and what's not visually to help you lay things out. What I've done in this particular case is I've sort of waited to the end to add the tire, because I want to make sure I've got room in the layout of this chassis for the tire. And the tire is also very recognizable, especially if it's got a particular type of hubcap, which I believe the DeLorean does. Your eyes do tend to go to it. The other thing is we've maximized as much as we can the edges of the side and the top just before they hit the edge, and we need to keep them proportional, so we're limited by that to stretch them even bigger. If I could, I would. Do you have to keep the side of the car exact, or could you split it in half and have one section here, have the other side of the car up here? That's fine. Again, what I'm trying to teach is the concept and the logic behind how you lay things out, not for you to simply follow lockstep what I'm doing here to this DeLorean model. So with the chassis selected and also with the tire, and shift left click to select that, you can see that these are currently overlapping. So what I want to do is I want to go into object mode, and we're going to project the tire using this UV projection, and that will also be planar. And I want to explain the logic of what I'm doing. The planar model in this case, really what we care about is this view. And remember that earlier I said you want to put a little wiggle room, a little space between the back and the front of the chassis and the roof sections, because you don't want it spilling over. Well, when we get into cutting and pasting the art onto this, you do want the art to go slightly over the UVs so that you can sort of overcompensate on these edges rather than undercompensate and get weird lines, because remember that this UV layout will actually be the basis of your picture. So if there isn't a color over it, you're going to get a weird white line projected onto this model exactly where the edge is. So in this case, we want to use that to our advantage, and I'm going to project from the side the correct side. So I've got simply a projection right from the side of the car on its hubcap. Is that all I need to do? Yes. Let me explain why. Because in this case, I'm going to paint the black of the tire past the UV limits, which means that those UVs, these ones here, these faces, remember how earlier when we couldn't find the top and the windshields because they were all stretched. They were all projected from the wrong angle and the polygons were reduced to lines. That's the same thing that's happening now, but we want to use that to our advantage because when we spill over the art over this, when we draw over this with a bigger tire, that black color will stretch the length of these polygons, which is to our advantage. We sort of have done the treads. No one's ever going to get this close in the video game, you know, unless the video game is Tread Inspector. You're never going to get that close to the game, which, by the way, Tread Inspector, terrible game. No one's going to get that close to the tires, so you can just get away with kind of this black texture stretched to the whole of the polygon. So this is exactly what we want. And we now have a perfect shell. And we can even increase that a little bit because I think we have quite an amount of room given this particular model for this to live up in the corner here. So let me grab that, grab the chassis. Yes, we certainly do. So we can grow this even bigger, and that's quite a lot of tire, but that's fine. And I can now, with a certain amount of confidence, kind of increase the size of these other important visual pieces. And there we are. By the way, is it a consideration that if you have chosen somehow an asymmetrical car, that you need to have not the half that I've done, but actually the whole? Well, yeah, it does depend. It is very dependent upon what particular vehicle you've chosen. Now, what I haven't been very good at doing is saving my progress. I've been just sitting here talking and working. But at this point, you should definitely save your work. And the other thing we're going to do at this late juncture is to duplicate this. So if I duplicate this, and I just hit Control D, which is the hotkey for it, then I've now made another tire for this DeLorean. And you know what? It would have been advantageous for me to keep the original garage because I think these tires are different sizes. I will verify that later by bringing them back in. But this is what I'm doing for now. That may not be actually given how far off the ground it is. Maybe that isn't what I want. So this, well, of course the drawing might be off the ground too. All these considerations. So I'm going to sort of rotate it until it vaguely matches this wheel well, like so. And I'm going to bring in the shoebox garage to validate that later. But what I have is I now have two tires whose UVs rests exactly on top of each other. So that's why I don't want to combine this yet. I actually want to come in here and at this juncture duplicate the geometry and or rather mirror the geometry, and that is going to allow this to kind of pop over to the other side. Make sure you know which you need, which side you need. I'm going to reset my settings because I may have gotten them exactly how I want, and then yours may not be the same way. So let me reset and kind of go through the different options here that you need to be aware of. First of all, I like to turn off merge vertices. I do not like merging with the original. I don't think it's advantageous. It does all kinds of weird things of merging and snapping, and I like to have two separate parts so that I can verify this is exactly what I want, this is exactly the size, the shape, and then I merge them. So right now I'm just going to call that chassis because it'll probably get renamed when I do this. And if I press apply, not mirror, because if you choose the leftmost button, this dialog box will disappear. And right now we're kind of doing the fun little Maya, see if I'm doing this right, and then press undo if I don't, rinse and repeat. Which, by the way, is why we want to have this particular model saved, because when you start playing with Maya like that, it could play back. So I'm going to hit apply here. That is not what we want, is the kind of oddly co-joined twins of the DeLorean set. So I'm going to go into the modeling window and press Z for undo. I believe you can come up here to edit, undo, and I'm going to choose another axis. Because I built this at an angle, it's probably going to be plus Z, apply. We're closer, not quite. I need it on the other side. So instead of positive Z, I need negative Z, apply. There we go. Now we're cooking with gas. And by gum, that does look a little more like a DeLorean. And one of the things that I think I forgot to do in the modeling tutorial that I don't think we were really able to do, and this is something that you should really validate when you have when you have your garage, to see how much you need to do this, that there wasn't just this slight tapering here at the edges. There's actually a tapering in the front. That rounding continues, and I want to get that slight rounding, not by grabbing everything, but just the front and the back, and simultaneously scaling them out ever so slightly. Look at that. Maybe even, do we dare push the limits? Yes, we do. So I'm going to be doing that. It is kind of eyeballing it. Again, I want to give you all a warning. I will be checking this with the garage later and the proper authorities. But for the time being, I've gotten a pretty nice effect just using these simple tools. The other part, let's turn on wireframe on shaded so we can actually see the model. The model is fairly consistent as far as the spacing. There's some busy parts in here, but I really don't have a lot of long, jagged, sharp edges. I've seen people try to fix things by drawing a polygon from here all the way over to here and then back in these slicing angles. It's really not meant to be like that. You need to part things out to be as cubed and consistent as possible. But we now have the advantage of grabbing both of these tires, and let's see if we can be sort of cheeky here with the mirror geometry. No, we cannot. So let's just press duplicate and ignore the man behind the mirror and duplicate, move them over. Okay, we got a lot of nice tires here, and that looks pretty cool. Again, validate using your garage. Don't do like Scott that deleted the garage. Make sure that you can read that back in. I suppose I might as well go over how to do that. So I'm going to save my work here. And I suppose it's a really good time to show you that you can actually read in, because I know that my earlier version had the garage. I'm now going to delete this, which is just the car. Let's bring up the outliner to show you. So all I have is the shoebox garage here, and I'm going to group that and rename it garage. And now I'm going to import. I don't want to open because it'll get rid of the garage. I want to import this car. Boom. All right, cool. So now if I press, well, I need to, of course, reassign all the textures because for the purpose of this tutorial, moved this entire folder into a different directory. But once I validate all that, I can check the tire placement from the front, from the side, make sure that the tops look good, verify how much I put curvature on the front and the back of the car by grabbing those vertices and scaling them out. So that will all be something I can now check. And let's just turn the visibility off on that for now, because we're kind of at the final stage, which is that you get to come in here to the outlining window, and you see all these different models because one is the chassis and several more are the tires, and we are allowed the advantage of coming up here and combining them. So we combine them. Remember that this has history. We have a lot of history at this point. Edit, delete all by type, history. Okay, good. So we now can come in here and kind of delete these other strange things. And DeLorean mesh is what I'm going to name this. You should name yours proportional to the vehicle you've chosen. And this allows you the chance to save your scene as Modeling 5. You choose whatever name you want. It's your dormitory. Live your life, man. Also, another thing, I might want to check whether or not the top is slightly raised. I can do that with the garage. Is the top, because as boxy as this initially is, the DeLorean is slightly rounded, ever so slightly rounded. And I need to, I'm just shooting from the hip here, but before I turn this in, I will be verifying all the changes that I did. So let me pop back here to turning off X-ray, and more or less show not just the nice single model that we have, DeLorean. Let's say that I'm done and I validated everything. And remember, once you get rid of stuff, you need to delete all by type, history, and then come up here to optimize scene size, and it gets rid of all the shaders. But when we select that one mesh, we also are 100% sure that in the UV editor, everything fits together and it's all proportional where it needs to be. So that's the end of the tutorial of laying out, or the concept of how to think about laying out these UV sets, both technically and artistically, so that your eye goes to these proportional important sections, and you need to determine what that is. Again, flatbed trucks, trains, planes, automobiles, all those are slightly different, but usually from the side and from the top is the most important, and having the advantage of sorting things out before you combine them is going to be very helpful. All right, happy modeling, and let me know if you're having any trouble. Thank you.